So I've been working with Chemist View for about a year, sort of consulting. But in the last, I think it was 4 months ago, I joined full time. And the first project I got given was this project. So we've been doing serverless there for a while now. So there's like the mobile app, for example, is serverless. But this is a particular project that I'm going to cover. So Chemist View, if you've not heard of us, so it's online only pharmacy. So sort of third biggest in the UK at the moment. There's Pharmacy to You and Lloyd's, I think, are above. But yeah, it's getting bigger and bigger. So yeah, 175,000 items per month about at the moment. Just moving to new premises. And there's NHS prescriptions, private prescriptions, and that's on behalf of, say, the NHS directly, so if you go to the doctor, but also through B2B and so on. So for this project, it was a company called ADHD 360, which you may have heard of, but they are a clinic where you can go if you've got ADHD. They'll basically do the diagnoses, treatment, that kind of thing, and if they decide that they want to prescribe some medication, then Chemist View is going to be the dispensing pharmacy for this. So they were changing from one pharmacy to us, and we had to take over that. So we needed a way to receive the prescription details and the patient details. So when their clinician decided to prescribe something, they would send across what we needed to be able to do the clinical checks and post it out. And as part of that, if it's a private prescription or even if it's NHS and we need to take that, that payment, we're taking the payment on, it's not coming from that company. So we need to calculate that kind of invoice, which is quite complicated for the NHS, and take the payment from the patient. There's also like a workflow in there that's quite complex. So with ADHD medication, it's like controlled drugs. And because it's controlled drugs, you have to receive like a paper prescription. And that paper prescription comes in, and then once we've received it, it can then be dispensed. So the electronic stuff comes in to allow us to do the checks up front, and then we need this workflow to allow that to happen. Is this working?
It is, yeah.
Oh, okay. And then, so customer service as well. Obviously, we're getting customers coming directly to us. They know it's us doing this. It's not like it's behind the scenes. They come to Chemist View, they pay for their medication, and we post it out. So customer service needs to be able to handle support queries as well. And we need to integrate with our existing systems. So in the warehouse, there's actually a robot in the warehouse that'll dispense drugs, for example. So we need to get it into them existing systems. It's not as exciting as it sounds. But, it needed to launch in 8 weeks. Now that was partly driven by a couple of things, but ADHD medication can be quite hard to get hold of. There's been a bit of a shortage for a while. Because we're quite a big player in the pharmacy industry, we can actually get hold of them drugs easier than smaller pharmacies. So it needed to launch quickly so that people could get their medication. Martyn Kilbryde. So I'm head of engineering there, but before that I was working with them, like I say, consulting. So I've been working with AWS for about 3 or 4 years now. So the way we started it is, obviously we wanted to concentrate on that business logic, and this is why we went down the serverless route. We've only got 8 weeks, and I don't want to handle EC2s, I don't want to do infrastructure there. Obviously, depending on the company, that might make sense, but for ours, we don't have a big infrastructure team. Serverless is the way to go. So obviously we get our built-in high availability. I don't really need to think too much about it. Now obviously if you want to start getting into the specifics, just being serverless doesn't give you 5 nines of availability, but it does give you at least 1 9 by default. I think it's 99.95 is what you get, kind of just as a simple API gateway to Lambda, for example. Low administration, again, we're not doing any kind of operations on this, which makes it a lot easier to manage for a small team. The scaling on there, we're not going to be, it's a public website that people come to pay, but it's behind a login screen. So we're not going to get loads of traffic that people coming in to hit it when they see an advert on TV, for example. But we do send out emails to people when things get prescribed. So we're going to get people coming in quite quickly during the day, but at night it's going to go down quite low. So we need scaling in there, but not hyperscale. But we don't want to, scale to zero makes sense. And obviously rapid development. We've got 8 weeks, so it's a very quick way to get going, especially because we've got experience in that. So I've done this a few times on a few different projects. Starting with a prototype just is the quickest way to go, rather than like a proof of concept, doing a prototype that then can turn into the end product and we get that MVP. So we did CDK for this, for infrastructure as code. And again, a lot of experience in there, but it also means we've got all the way through, we've got TypeScript all the way down. We wanted linting from day one because, again, we don't want to sit there and spend a lot of time going through making sure people are doing code reviews and things like that. Unit tests from day one as well. And get the hexagonal architecture in there from day one. So that's just meaning that we can extend this Lambda code as we go through. We don't want to have to keep reinventing that code. So we can start off with just initializing a CDK app. And obviously, if you've done that before, you will get this full CDK application. And that'll give you a stack and it'll give you the ability to just do a CDK deploy and it'll get straight into the account. And then from there, again, for the front end, we decided we're going for React. So we can use Vite, however you pronounce it, to generate that initial portal. And again, we get all that boilerplate for free. And now we've got a full static website we can deploy. And we can hook that together. If we really wanted, we could get Copilot to do it for us. But ultimately, we just need to start putting in these basics. So an S3 bucket, CloudFront, and so on. And ultimately, after the end of this, in just a few hours, we've got ourselves an authenticated website. So we've got Cognito, API gateway, and a static website deployed to S3. That's on our DNS. We've got unit tests and linting built in, just the basics that you get when you set it up. And we've got CI/CD on there with ephemeral environments, which if you're doing that, you'll know the power of having an environment per branch. Means that from that kind of day one, we can have multiple developers and it'll create an environment for every single developer, another benefit of serverless, and we're not stepping on each other's toes. So once we've got that prototype in place, like I say, in that first day, we've got something deployed and working. What's the most complex area? Because we've only got 8 weeks, we need to really make sure we get them bits done. And so the integration is the most interesting part of this, because we've got to integrate with this third party. They've got their own systems. They've got development they need to do as well. So define the interface as early as possible. We just needed to get that interface in place so they could start development. And so we can do that with a basic stubbed API. So we make sure we've got validation in there so that they can build against it and they get a success saying we've accepted that prescription. And then when we actually make it work, suddenly we're starting to handle that code. They don't see any difference. And we wanted this shared staging environment so we can get that in place as quick as possible, and this kind of living Swagger document. So we've got this shared documentation. We're working on the same environment and they can get going really quickly as well. Now going back to this validation, if we do API gateway, we can do stub responses directly in API gateway, and if we're using CDK, we can get them written in there pretty quick, and the built-in validation as well. So as an example, if you've never seen it before, this is in CDK, but we're just defining the schema there. So we've got street, city, postcode, we've got like min lengths, max lengths, and so on. So we can get that validation in quite quickly. And then when we get that post to the prescription endpoint, for example, they're just passing in customer name. They've not got the address in there. If that fails validation, by default, that's what you get from API Gateway, which is an invalid request. So it's sort of useful because it's rejecting it, but it's very hard to do an integration if you don't know why it's failing. So you can turn on in there this kind of bad request body gateway response. So tell it that if there is an failure with validation, that we want to return a 400. And specifically at this bit, we want to send back the error as a string so they can see why it failed. But now what we get a nice, it's string and it's JSON formatted, but at least they get told that the address is missing, which is quite useful. But for those who have done this before, you'll know that if you do something like this, so they pass in a blank customer name, a blank street, what API Gateway gives you is that the empty string is too short. And for a previous customer, when I was consulting, we had this exact same issue. The third party is hitting us with really long, complex requests, and they're just getting back basically nonsense. It doesn't tell them what they need to know. And I've not found a way to solve this, so like directly in API Gateway, which is a shame. So we went down the route of something called Zod, which if you've heard of, you'll know that it's quite, gives you a lot of control over the validation. And so if you've not, there is a QR code, but just Google it, it's only 3 letters. Don't know why I did a QR code. Yeah, so the code there that's just defined in TypeScript, you can start to see at the top, maybe if you're close enough, that we've got things like checking using regexes, min and maxes, you can have custom messages, and whether it's a string and so on. There's a lot of power there, and you can write any code you want to do full validation. So at that point, we can return the error back. Now there are different types of errors that can come out of it, so you can get field errors, form errors, and so on. So again, it's a prototype, this is sort of day 2 almost. We're just flattening them errors and returning it as a string so that they've got the errors. So now with that same example, you now get something more like this, which tells you that it needs to be 1 character long and the postcode should be letters and so on, which is really good. And obviously we can then go back, revisit that and make it maybe a structured response when we've got a bit more time. But because we assumed this was just going to be used for debugging, they would hit this, they would build their integration, and at that point you're live. It turned out they ended up passing that error, which, this is the problem with an interface. We defined an interface, we said we'd return an error string. They got an error string, so then they did the logical thing, and JSON passed that, and so on. So we can't go back and revisit that, not without breaking that backwards compatibility anyway. So yeah, the next thing is the patient themselves. They need to get in there, they need to manage the orders, and they need to be able to pay. So they need a full website, they need a portal that they can log into. So we have to authenticate that it's the right patient. Now, ADHD 360, they already have a patient portal. Someone can log into that to sort out appointments and so on. So they've got their own authentication provider. So at this point, we've got a few different options. One is that we can just create that cognito, just let people register. When we receive the prescription, we can create them an account and email them and say, click here, reset your password and so on, and get them logged in. And the other option is we can try and do a custom single sign-on, and that way they can log in with the same credentials, or they can follow a link between the 2 portals. Obviously the benefit with this one, the downside of this one is that they have to have 2 passwords, and what will happen. Nobody wants to log into in their heads, the same portal twice. And this one, obviously, we've got 8 weeks. I don't really want to attack that in several months, never mind the few weeks that we had. So we ended up going down the passwordless authentication route. Now there's a few options here. First, a lot of you are familiar with this with, say, Slack, is obviously you get a one-time code when you type in your email. The second is that they get a magic link sent to them that they click. Downside of that one is you have to be on the same device, so you have to be on your phone, for example, and if they're on their work computer, it's a bit awkward. And obviously you can use FIDO2, so passkeys, but for that one you need some way to authenticate them first before they set up their passkey. So we decided to go for the first one where they type in their email address. Now this is just a simplified cognito sort of diagram of how that works. The link will take you through to the different triggers if you want to look at more details, and there are some guides around, but at a higher level, you set it up with Cognito such that it'll hit this define auth challenge trigger, and we just return that this is a one-time passcode, one-time password thing to get in. And then it'll hit the other Lambda, the one in the middle, to create that one-time code, and we use SES to send that out to them. And then if they type that code in on the next screen, then we'll verify it. And in the front end, we're using React, so we can use the sort of amplify front end libraries, not back end, hate that, but for the front end, and customize that obviously for the typing in the passcode, because it's a custom flow. Okay, let's going to be hard. But yeah, one of the main issues is email providers do love to mark things as spam. So after about a week, new customers couldn't log in because that one-time passcode email has got like images in it and so on. So a couple of things that we discovered as part of that, just to make sure, is that the domain that it's been emailed from, any images on there, any links are all the same, and it doesn't look like a phishing email basically. And the other, if you've ever set up email security, is just make sure that link will take you to the cyber, like the government cyber sort of website where you can check the security of your email address. But effectively, that'll make sure that your email is legit. We also need to build a full customer-facing website. Mentioned that before. So to get around that, we just have to use the technology we already have the expertise for. So anything off the shelf, we don't want to get stuck into that world of that pixel perfect design cycle. It needs to just be components and get going. And so yeah, we use React for the front end, and for the component library, Chakra UI. Really quick for getting message boxes in there, text boxes and so on, having something built up really quickly. And then yeah, through CloudFront, easiest option for getting estimates hosted. But then with API Gateway for any requests, the only downside with that is you'll start getting cause errors, which are awful. So we did move that behind CloudFront, so it's now all under the same URL. The other thing is around flows for a prescription. So like I said before, there's different flows that we need to do around how people, do they need to pay, are they exempt, and so on. So step functions for that just makes sense for us. Again with serverless, so as we get that request from the prescription endpoint, get it through validation, we can stick it into a step function. And as a very simple example, I won't go through it in detail just because of time, but we can directly hit Cognito to check if they've got an account, create an account in Cognito, create the account in Dynamo, insert the order and so on. Obviously, this is simplified, so we then started to add in, say, catches, so we can then directly catch errors and stick them into Dynamo so we can display them in the front end, for example, for the admins. And we can also extend that, so in this case, if there's an order type, so we started getting different orders, NHS orders, private orders, and so on. So quite easy to extend, obviously. And then from that, I say about errors. If you've ever used Chatbot, it's really good, is send errors through SNS into Chatbot. You can get them straight into Slack. So if something fails validation, I don't want to be looking at it as a technical person. And so in this case, you can send it straight to Slack and tell them this ID failed, and then they can go and look into it, for example. But yeah, 8 weeks isn't long, obviously. So that was one of the main issues. So yeah, we had a small team working on this. We created a squad just for this, 4 engineers, including myself, a tester and a product owner. The software development lifecycle was just a very simplified Kanban to get through that, and making sure everything's small, deployable. Backwards compatibility, not an issue during the first 8 weeks, obviously, but now we've been live for about 2 months. We're still going ahead in that. And yeah, LinkedIn and Prettier, I mentioned it earlier, I just don't want people getting hung up on spacing and stuff like that. That's a bugbear of mine. So yeah, focusing on good enough and like high value for sure. So yeah, is it done? Well, no, obviously not. But yeah, we have been working on it since the 8 weeks to add new features and so on. But yeah, in terms of where we're going to go next, so the unit tests, we didn't forget unit tests, but there's definitely areas that weren't tested, which they should have been. And that's just because I didn't enforce that a certain engineer had to test if they weren't quick at writing tests, for example, whereas others did. Data quality and integration just in general, when you're getting thousands of kind of prescriptions through, how would you check that every single one, if you've got like an issue 10% of the time, how do you spot that? So just in general, like looking at that data quality and the integration, updating prescriptions afterwards, all of that area, we've done work in that since we went live. And yeah, EDA in there, so the whole thing is we wanted, for the rest of the business, we're moving towards the event-driven architecture across the board, not just in certain areas. And so we have in these domains. So payments, for example, was done straight into this application. but we want a payment service because the back end of the app also does a payment integration. So we're just splitting more areas out of this MVP. And yeah, if you got any questions, ask me afterwards because I'm out of time. But
on time.
oh, there you go, on time. But yeah, if you want to grab me afterwards, I'll be hanging around in a very bright hoodie. Thank you.